Today's lesson is on divisibility. First, we're going to look at our divisibility rules. So our divisibility rule for 2 is a number is divisible by 2 if it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. So some examples would be 6, because since there's only one digit, it would end in a 6. 80 ends in a 0. And 94 ends in a 4. So all three of these numbers end in 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. Now our divisibility rule for 3 is a number is divisible by 3 if the sum of its digits is divisible by 3. So now look at some examples. The first example we have is 18. For 18, if we're going to have the sum of its digits, that means that we're going to add 1 plus 8. And 1 plus 8 is 9. 9 can be divided by 3, so we know that 18 can be divided by 3. For 159, we're going to add up our digits. 1 plus 5 is 6, and 6 plus 9 is 15. 15 can be divided by 3, so we know that 159 can be divided by 3. And our last example is 711. So we'll add up its digits. So 7 plus 1 is 8, plus 1 more is 9. 9 can be divided by 3, so we know that 711 can also be divided by 3. Next is our divisibility rule for 4. A number is divisible by 4 if the last two digits are divisible by 4. So now let's look at our examples. The first number we have is 24. 24 only has two digits, so we have to use the whole thing. 24 is divisible by 4. We can divide that by 4 because 4 times 6 equals 24. Our next number we have is 104. So we look at the last two. The last two digits would be 04, or we can just say 4. 4 can be divided by 4, so we know that 104 can be divided by 4. And our last example is 448. Our last two digits would be 48 or 48, and 48 can be divided by 4. So we know that 448 can also be divided by 4. Next is our divisibility rule for 5. A number is divisible by 5 if it ends in a 0 or 5. Now let's look at our examples. Our first example is 65. 65 ends in a 5, so it is divisible by 5. 80 ends in a 0, so it is divisible by 5 as well. And 305 ends in a 5, so we know that 305 is divisible by 5. Now we're going to look at our divisibility rule for 6. A number is divisible by 6 if it is divisible by both 2 and 3. So we're going to check and see if our rules for 2 and 3 both work. If they do, then we know the number is also divisible by 6. So our examples would be, the first one is 30. We'll check our rule for 2. 2 is that it is an even number, or it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. 30 ends in a 0, therefore 2 works. Our rule for 3 is that we add up the digits. So 3 plus 0 is 3, and 3 can be divided by 3. So that's why 30 can also be divided by 6. Our next example is 156. 156 ends in a 6. The rule for 2 is that it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. So that's how we know it can be divided by 2. Our rule for 3 is that we add up the digits. 1 plus 5 is 6, and 6 plus 6 is 12. Since 12 can be divided by 3, we know that our original number, 156, can also be divided by 3. So since 2 and 3 work, that means that 6 will also work for this number. And our last example is 912. 912 ends in a 2. So it is divisible by 2 because the rule is that it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. And we have a 2 at the end. And our rule for 3 is that we add up our digits. 9 plus 1 is 10, plus 2 is 12. 12 can be divided by 3, so we know that 3 works for 912. Since 2 and 3 both work, we know that this number is also divisible by 6. Now for our divisibility rule for 9. A number is divisible by 9 if the sum of its digits is divisible by 9. This is the same rule as 3, except after we add up our digits, we see if our answer can be divided by 9. So now our examples, the first one we have is 72. 7 plus 2 is 9, and 9 can be divided by 9. Next example is 459. So 4 plus 5 is 9, and 9 plus 9 is 18, and 18 can be divided by 9. And our last example is 783. 7 plus 8 is 15, and 15 plus 3 is 18, and 18 can be divided by 9. The last rule we're going to look at is our divisibility rule for 10. A number is divisible by 10 if it ends in a 0. So for examples, the first one we have is 90. 90 ends in a 0. Our second one is 640. That ends in a 0. And our last one is 800. And 800 ends in a 0. So all of these numbers are divisible by 10 because they end in a 0. Now we're going to look at a couple of examples. Tell if each number is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, or 10. So for our first example, our number we're working with is 345. First, we're going to test that number for 2. 2 would be that it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. This number does not end in any of those numbers. It's not an even number. So our answer for 2 would be no. This number is not divisible by 2. Now we'll check for 3. For 3, we're going to add up our digits. 3 plus 4 is 7, and 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 can be divided by 3, because if we do 12 divided by 3, we get 4. So we know that our original number, 345, can also be divided by 3. So that is a yes. Now we'll check for 4. For 4, we're looking at the last two digits, so 45. 45 cannot be divided by 4, because we know that 4 times 11 is 44, and 4 times 12 is 48. So 4 does not work. That would be a no. For 5, our rule is that it ends in a 5 or 0. Since 345 ends in a 5, 5 will work. So that's a yes. For 6, all we need to do is go back and look and see if 2 and 3 both work. 2 did not work. 3 did work. Since we don't have that both of them worked, 6 will not work. So that would be a no. Next, we'll check our rule for 9. For 9, we're going to add up our digits. 3 plus 4 is 7, and 7 plus 5 is 12. Now we need to see if 12 can be divided by 9. 12 cannot be divided by 9, so our answer is no. And now we'll check our rule for 10. Our rule for 10 is that it ends in a 0. 345 does not end in a 0, so we have no. For our second example, the number we're looking at, or that we're working with, is 540. So we're going to check all of our numbers again. This time we're going to use the number 540. So our rule for 2 is that it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. And this number ends in a 0. So that answer would be yes. Our rule for 3, we're going to add up our digits. 5 plus 4 is 9, and 9 plus 0 is still 9. And 9 can be divided by 3. And since 9 can be divided by 3, 540 can also be divided by 3. So we have yes. Next, we'll check our rule for 4. Our rule for 4 is we look at the last two digits. We have 40. 40 can be divided by 4 because 40 divided by 4 is 10. So 540 can also be divided by 4. So again, we have yes. Now we'll look at 5. Our rule for 5 is that it ends in a 5 or 0. This number ends in a 0, so 5 will work, so we say yes. For 6, we go back and look at our answers for 2 and 3. If both of them have a yes, then 6 will be yes. If one of them has a no or both of them have a no, then 6 will be no. 2 was yes, and 3 was yes. So that means that 6 is also yes. 540 can be divided by 6 evenly. Now we'll look at our rule for 9. For 9, we add up our digits. 5 plus 4 is 9, and 9 plus 0 is 9. 9 can be divided by 9, so our answer again is yes. So now we'll look at our rule for 10. Our rule for 10 is that the number ends in a 0. And 540 does end in a 0, so again we're going to have yes.